Well, let me give you a warm welcome to our podcast today. We have another special guest. Last time we had Ian from Tough Talk. This week we've got Elijah Kirby, who's going to share his story, what he's into. And Elijah, I'm going to just start you off because we met kind of at the same youth camp and stuff like that. And so can I just ask you, how did you become a Jesus follower?
Yeah, that same youth camp. Went there. My youth worker missold this lie that it was just full of girls wanting to date. And I went there with a friend who broke his leg on the first day in the football tournament. That left me with 1,000 awesome radical people who loved Jesus. And I was amazed, gobsmacked, in awe at their passion and belief and just zeal for life. And I stuck my way to the front of this crowd, this worship crowd. And there's a guy preaching on stage that night called Mike Pilavacci, who I hadn't really heard about. And Mike winked at me and came off at the end. And he said, when I was on stage, God told me about your life. And I said, yeah, of course he did. And he said he did. And he told me some of the details that nobody would know about and that I might share more about in this call later on. And that really opened me up to thinking, I wonder if there's a God. And I went back to the front of this worship venue, put my hands in the air, because that's what all the Christians were doing. And literally the Holy Spirit came upon me, transformed me. I remember just probably like deliverance, I suppose. All of this hurt and pain just gushing out of me. I felt free, light. I was totally buzzing. And there was that moment I said, God, I invite you into my heart, lead me, and I give you everything that comes from this moment. And that was it. That was that moment of surrender for me. Impacted me forever.
That's incredible. And when you said there was a change, what were some of the bigger changes that you could visibly see in your life then for yourself? What were the...
It was a few things. A love for people. You know how loads of us get dead grumpy at people and, we're like, oh, we're fed up. I often say now it shows that we haven't spent enough time with God, because the closer I got to God in that moment, the more I just loved people and realized that actually people were beautiful. One of the big significant things was I was kicked out of school at that point in my life, and the school let me back in because I told them all I'd become a Christian in the summer, and they're like, no way. I said, I have. So they let me back in. And I remember people I used to bully, and people I used to give lots of grief to, and people I used to look at and think, you're whatever, appearance-wise, didn't match my standard of what I think someone should look like. I remember I went back to school after that amazing encounter. I looked at these people I'd looked down on before and suddenly saw such value, beauty, just this glow about them. Like weirdly, as a 15-year-old guy, thinking, you're beautiful. I remember things like I used to drop litter and then run and pick it back up again because I felt guilty. This idea of caring for God's creation. I mean, where did that come from? I suppose it was the telltale signs, like the parties I used to go to. It wouldn't involve being promiscuous. It would be me saying to my mates, actually, I want to save myself for someone special. And I want to save myself because I believe I should. So it was these telltale signs of these habits and lifestyle that showed this intrinsic internal change that happened.
That's incredible. And you got saved, and then you started getting the ministry quite early, very similar to me, really. I was about 16 when I first started preaching, teaching stuff. Was it the same for you? About what age were you starting to realize you had these gifts to communicate and reach people?
Oh, do you know what? Well, you've also got a higher call in your life, Keith, because I was 17. I was 17. But I remember feeling that I wanted to do something. I wanted to tell all my mates. And I knew that moment of encounter, I had to go and tell all my friends and anybody who would listen that there was a God who loved them and that he was real. And I knew it without a shadow of a doubt. So my whole focus became that. And so I got into youth work. Most people get into youth work, don't they? Because we're kind of young and we say, I want to relate to that age group. I couldn't do it now. But, and I got into youth work. So I was 17, did a gap year with Youth for Christ. But actually the gifts, interestingly, you mentioned the gifts, I shied away from for a while. So really had this nice idea, like most Christians do, of ending up on stage at some point, but was petrified. Unlike you, Keith, you were a natural of, I daren't do it. I don't want to put myself in the limelight. I haven't got much to say. I'm not a good communicator. I just like feeling really awkward in it. And so actually, I was being offered various things of hosting events and venues, and really struggled thinking it's not a natural fit. It's not a natural fit. But I was getting offered this stuff quite often. So forced myself into it. And interestingly, the more I got into it, as ever, the easier it became, and actually really found a space there. And God would show up amazingly in those moments.
Wow. And can you just take us a little bit, because before we start to record, we were talking about some of the exciting ministries that you've been involved in. Can you take me through that before we get to the main one that you're involved in now? Is that all right?
Yeah, so really there's a whistle-stop tour. I think what we do in Churchland is we see people with potential and we say, hey, how about this position or that place? And that pretty much happened to me over an 8-year period quite quickly, of various roles, responsibilities. Like I said, I started in youth work and had a passion for young people, and really started out by making loads of mistakes. I would say didn't have a clue. And so, I mean, this really kind church full of lots of old people said, go on, Elijah, have a go. And they were really kind and gave me space to make lots of mistakes. But actually in that first role at youth work, I remember we started these events, these music events, and we had about 1,000 young people kind of turn out. We were thinking, this is crazy. How do we manage these people? Data protection was out of the window, safeguarding we were getting there with, it was just like amazing. How do we respond to these moments? And then really my first kind of major leadership role started when I started to oversee and manage people and budgets, not just ideas and initiatives. And I remember there was a youth venture that I led in the Northeast. And when I took over on this role of this organization, there was about 10 young people and just me as a youth worker. And then amazingly, after about 3 years, we saw about 40 staff join us, and we'd see about 450 children and young people every week pile into these resources. So again, it was this crash course of budgets, managing people, leading where God was leading, was navigating. And so I learned a lot in those years. And then that took me to London, where I started pastoring a youth organization, youth church called Soul Survivor Harrow, which was around kind of urban London, grabbing hold of people in rich areas and poor areas and trying to make radical disciples for Jesus. And love that role. And then actually through that was kind of coincided with the Olympics in London. And I remember I was nominated to run with the Olympic torch for services to young people. And I remember running through the streets of London holding the Olympic torch thinking, this is like absolutely amazing, like where God leads, and just praying as I ran. And just after that point, Americans in particular got really passionate about London. I remember I had some phone calls and they were like, hey man, we're just so passionate about London right now, because it was on the agenda, 2020.
Can I just say that's a great American accent?
You whereabouts, but it's somewhere / Canadian. But I remember in 2012, 2013, we got invited to launch a brand new church in East London. And so my wife and I, Jo, we moved from Northwest to East London. And when we were there, we started this house church, what you would call it, with 6 people in our front room that we'd bribe to get there. We'll give you cake and tea. Just come and hear what we've got to say. And so week 1, there were 6 of us. The second week, there was 4. 2 didn't come back. And we're thinking, oh, no, what have we done? And then, amazingly, this thing started to grow. And we gathered and prayed, like the early model of church. We gathered, prayed, invited the Spirit of God to come and do what he wants. And more started to join. And within 6 months, there was 40 plus people crammed into this small living room every week, sharing Bible and life together. And literally people were sat wherever you could sit, just find somewhere and thinking, this is incredible. And then this amazing thing happened where, those moments, Keith, where you think God's leading, I'm going to do it, but it just doesn't make sense. And we decided to do this big launch, and we hired the largest venue in East London that we could find. And I remember signing the deal thinking, yeah, let's do it. We trust God. And then in the weeks beforehand, walking past this building most days, praying like mad, thinking, what have I done? Why? All my days, how can we make it smaller? How can we get 20 chairs in? I don't know why we did it. Anyway, amazingly, when we launched this church in East London, all of the chairs, all of the capacity went. And so there was standing room only. And again, just those moments of thinking, God, this is incredible. And so that kind of led us through journeys of leadership, planting churches, managing budgets and teams, making millions of mistakes, but watching God do what only he can do, the miracle stuff.
Yeah, that's incredible. And it's incredible because especially being on the younger scale of leadership, do you find that when you make mistakes, you get a harder judgment, or was it more lenient towards you? And how did you recover from your mistakes, if I could ask, just out of interest?
That's a really good point. And so actually, thankfully, I think surrounding yourself with people who love you really helps, doesn't it? And so people see the mistakes, but they also see the potential in you. And I think actually, genuinely, I've never tried to make any nasty mistakes or, financial mistakes. It's probably more been conversations, or I could have handled that person or situation better. And so actually, I think lots of it's been reflective kind of coaching back to me of, it's okay. What have you learned? How do we pick it up? How do you not do it again? I've got to be totally honest. When we make mistakes with people, we don't often want to make those same mistakes again, do we? Because it hurts quite a lot. So most of it's been, ouch, that hurt. I want to learn. But there's been a couple of things over the years where there's been stuff that's come out that might have felt that it hasn't really been fair. Like, I didn't say it like that, so it's been misinterpreted. And I think part of leadership is you can't always fight the battles. You've got to trust the Lord. What's the whole saying? It's pure heart and clean hands, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so as long as we know that we've got that within ourselves, that we've got pure heart motives and we've tried our best, then we've got to trust the Lord.
Absolutely. That's great. And so then you move from church work into what you are doing now. How do you can you explain what you are doing now? I don't want to spoil the surprise because it's incredible. And can you just tell me why you have a passion for this? And because it is a big issue happening in the UK and of course across the world, but why do you have a passion for it? And tell us your story on that side of it.
Absolutely. And so a couple of years ago, my wife and I were pastoring a vineyard church in Teesside, like on a voluntary basis, which was amazing. We loved it. And as part of that role in our life at the time, we had 3 children at the time, and I was leading the teams in parts of the UK for Tia Fund. And so life was pretty busy. And I remember, and I was really happy in my role. And I remember a phone call from a friend, and they said, Elijah, you realise the foster care system in the UK is in crisis mode, don't you? And I said, I've got no idea. And this obviously evoked a passion in me because I was brought up and I was raised in foster care. And I attended lots of different schools. I lived with lots of different families. And my experience of foster care ultimately was a good one, but was very painful in the journey of getting there. And so part of my passion for the local church is I know it transforms lives. There's 2 factors in my life that transformed me. One was a loving family. This is a loving foster family. And it was the loving church who put arms around me. And that really put my life on a trajectory of purpose and value and I suppose belonging. And so when I heard about the system in crisis, I thought, I really thought the care system had turned a corner, that everyone was like me. They find happy families and love and care. And I started doing some research and just saw the stats were harrowing. It's the worst it's been in 4 decades. More kids entering care. And it's not even the number of kids entering care. It's what happens to the kids when they're in care. The outcomes for children and looked after children are not good. And so most of the stats right now in the UK, from dying young, from those who make up the prison population, those with ongoing mental health problems, those who have children and then their children are taken into care. This is the numbers really predominantly of those who have been in care and are in care. And so you think, God's got lots to say about this. How do we do something? And so a couple of years ago, this conversation started to go around in my mind of how do we as the church remodel the foster care system? 120 years ago, we know that William Booth was looking at the adult care system in the slums in London and Liverpool, really thinking when Christ is at the centre of care, people's lives begin to change. And the issue with the current care system is it's clinical, it's not based on Jesus' values, and it's really a safeguarding model. Yeah. But what happens if you put Jesus back in the picture? And so I thought, how do we mobilise the church nationally to reform the UK foster care system? But actually, more than that, how do we see the tens of thousands of lives in the system currently totally transformed? And so I looked at my life as a model. And it was a pretty happy ending with a loving family in the local church. But the journey to that point was quite hairy, and that's where most children in care currently are. And so my story was when I was 2.5, 3 years old. I remember vividly a knock on the door. I remember the feel of panic in the atmosphere, and there was a policeman and a social worker at the front door. I remember so clearly, and I was taken away into foster care. And I was taken into foster care because of abuse and neglect, and I was beaten. And I remember my sister told me a story where mum disappeared for a few weeks, and all we survived on was yogurt. And really the story went kind of, I suppose, pear-shaped when mum got a new boyfriend. Our new boyfriend was physical to the kids, and mum felt his affection more than she loved us, clearly. And so she stayed with him. The abuse continued. And I don't think mum was in a very good place either. There's reports that mum was had lots of relationships for paid services, if we want to say that kind of vibe. And so there was lots of dysfunction in the family, and I was taken into care. And over the course of 8 years, probably 8 different schools, 8, 9 different families. And some of these families were just horrendous. You know, one in particular, we used to live on this farm in the middle of nowhere, and they had a bunch of foster kids with them. And they stuck one of the foster kids in a caravan at the bottom of the field and would tell social services that this young boy wanted and chose to live in this cold caravan. I remember this, they used to put salt on the breakfast rather than sugar. Wow. And so you would, just spit the breakfast out. It's just weird, like psychological abuse of the lady would come into your bedroom, pour water over your bed sheets. And then the guy would steam in really angry and beat you and say, "You've wet the bed again." Just weird systematic abuse. Why? And there was one story where we slept out one night in this dog kennel on the farm, me and the other kids. And we must have picked some berries off this bush. And I remember this lady raced out and she said, "You stupid kids, the berries are poisonous. You're going to die tonight. You won't wake up in the morning." And I must have been 7 at this point. And I remember going into the house, laying in bed and saying, I don't know where it came from, "God, if you're real, if there's a God, don't let me die tonight." I don't know where did that come from. I'd never been to church in my life, never heard about God, but something in me just felt to reach out. Don't let me die. I don't think those berries were poisonous. I just think she was, just being a weird psychological abuse. But yeah, this journey of abuse, it was horrendous. I remember there was a big court battle at the time that they wanted to keep me, other people wanted to keep me. And it's weird when you go through care, you make attachments to people, even though you know it's not healthy. So I knew that these people weren't the best for me, but I didn't want to leave them because I knew it's better the devil you know, right, than the devil you don't. And I remember I went to school one day and the teacher came in and she had tears down her face. And she said, "Elijah, can you come and see me outside in the corridor, please?" And I thought I was probably being naughty as usual. So I went out to see her and she said, come and sit on my knee. And I sat on her knee and she said, "I'm really sorry. I don't know how to say this, but there's a social worker here in the car and you're going to have to leave with them right now. And you won't have any of your possessions, any of your belongings. You're just going to have to go with them. I don't even know where it's to. I'm really sorry. Goodbye." And I remember there was these moments in my life, that was one of them, of just moving on, this cycle of brokenness.
It feels like a lot of your freedoms were taken away as well, just to be told right there and then you've got to go and there's no say of what you do or where you go. That's tough, man.
Yeah, and so the reality is I think this happens a lot currently as well. And so we would say it's about having a child-led approach. What's best for the child? But often in social work land, it's, well, this is more convenient. Let's just do that. And so I went, and actually I feel really thankful, I've got to say, that I went to a family after that placement who I think God had for me, who cherry-picked them. And they took me to church, in and out for a bit, and really started to love me unconditionally. Even when I pushed back, they held on and had that model of family. And I stayed with them from when I was 8 to when I was, well, still my family now. Just amazing model of loving me unconditionally. And so this stuff started happening in my life, really. And there was a phase when I was 15, I mentioned at the start of the call, where I was kicked out of school. This big moment where I was excluded. But also I had this real impression, I don't know where it came from, Keith, that my real dad somewhere was this multimillionaire who owned this massive business empire. And that I didn't need to try hard at life because he was going to come over this hill. I actually thought this one day in a big black limousine, and he'd be like, son, where have you been? Jump in, and we'd go off into paradise together. That was my impression of life. And at the same time, when I encountered Jesus, that same summer, the social services came back to me and they said, Elijah, we found your real dad. We're really sorry, but he was found just a few months ago dead in a gutter somewhere, and he died of a heroin overdose. And so suddenly I was kicked out of school. My worldview was obliterated of having this rich dad who's going to oversee and look after me. And I suddenly thought, what is life about? And so when I gave my life to Jesus, this clear focus and vision of, I've met a God who loves me unconditionally, he knows every detail. I've met my Father in heaven who just so happens to be a billionaire. And actually, I've got to communicate this to other people. So fast forward a few years, that question you had around what are you doing now? About a year ago, just as lockdown, the first one, 0.3 started, we launched North Point Care, an organisation set up to reform the care system, working across local churches nationally to remodel how we care for children based on everything I've just said, loving families and a loving church. Knowing that when we apply those things to every desperate situation, that actually the results can be tremendous, life-changing, life-transforming. And so we set this organisation up, North Point, to really find loving, fostering families, to nurture the journey, to make sure kids have the best wraparound care the planet can offer them, and really to model what I've experienced, knowing that we can change so many stories. I mean, Keith, imagine there's a future prime minister right now who's in foster care, who when we work with them in a family, they go on to lead the country. But not even if it's that grandeur, what if there's someone who won't grow up to beat their partner up, will grow up to have a steady job, will grow up to pastor a church or to be a loving parent? We've broken this cycle that the world tells us we should expect in the care system. And so that's really what our radical mission is all about.
And that's a great vision to have, to see a young person and say, you know what, if we change just that cycle, and then they'll get the passion to change the cycle. But you're talking about getting the church involved. How can a local church get involved in this, and what does that look like in your idea and vision?
Well, I reckon the church in the next 10 years in the UK can reform the UK foster care system if we're up for it. And what it looks like really is that churches, as North Point, will resource the journey, we'll be there and we'll kind of help do it. But I think it's raising, fostering communities. It's the whole, it takes a village mentality. So it's raising the local church, who is such a tremendous support, to say, we're going to put this on our agenda for the next 10 years. So imagine if every church could raise 1 or 2 families to foster, we'd solve the care crisis overnight. Wow. Amazing. I mean, it's that simple. And so really right now as North Point, we've partnered with a bunch of local authorities across the Northeast, and we've partnered so far with about 100 churches. And they've said to us, we want to be involved. Count us in. And so we'll resource the journey. We'll provide updates and kind of inspirational videos. And what the church, I think, really needs to do is pray about, are there any families in our communities and congregations who want to pray into being advocates for children and young people? Can they mentor? Can they foster? Can they adopt? And really, I think we'll manage the process with our team of social workers, and the church really, I suppose, will step up. And really, North Point's role in this is to equip the church for the church's mission of working with orphans. You know, the whole biblical mandate of working with widows and orphans. And so North Point are here to support the church to fulfill that great mission. And so that's a really easy way. Of course, praying, God, would you do something? Would you change the atmosphere? And also through our website, northpointcare.co.uk, you can see lots of ways to get involved. So things like sibling placements, working with young mums who've just had babies. We want people to step up and say, yeah, we can nurture these guys for a while. Some people might say, I'm too busy, but I could give some funds towards transforming the system. So that's lots of ways we can all, I would say, play our part.
Yeah. And, you know, I've personally seen church have a great impact on that side, because we, next to our church, right next door, actually, we used to have a home where children would be there, they'd come out and foster and so. But because they were next to us, they would come to our youth group. And I remember one time my mum, who was working in Monk Weymouth School, had this radical idea. Ninth hour, you remember ninth hour? You don't know what ninth hour is, you've missed out. So she took a bunch of school kids the ninth hour from her school with permission, of course, and then some of the kids who were from the foster home next door says, "Oh, we want to get involved and go to this," and just seeing, because the hard part is they would come, but then they would disappear a week or 2 weeks. Some of them would stay for longer, but they would all come with the same kind of hurt and issues. But then after a little while, realizing, as you say, as much as they kick back, the church is still going to love them. So I'm an advocate of getting them into this system. It's good, man.
Thank you, mate. And also, I think part of North Point, I'm really excited. I've got to be dead honest. I think it's a church crowd watching this, but even if not, I want to see people who aren't churched coming forward, and we are seeing it amazingly, actually, to foster with North Point. And so what we're saying to these families are, you realize this model of transformation is based on local church, and people are really warm. They're really warm. I mean, people say things in different ways, like, yeah, the church provides lots of good community. Absolutely. And so the 100 churches that we've partnered with so far, and we'd love to partner with Hilton Mission, is we're saying, actually, when these families come through who are unchurched, we want to introduce them to our friends in churches, because we know that if the churches get around these families, and if the kids get into youth groups and young people get into youth groups, the transformation is incredible. But even if the families don't want to go to church, we're saying we advocate for these children going to youth groups and youth sessions, because that's what transformed my life. And so they're saying things like, these families, yeah, that sounds really amazing. So we would love to kind of push some of these families to local churches. So grow your congregation, but equally you can love and nurture these families in turn. Provide a meal, pray for them, ask them how they're doing. You know, ask little James if he's attending, choosing that youth. The impact will be incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Elijah, I'm going to let you go, and I'm going to just quickly pray for us now as for you as a brother, and I'm going to pray for those who are listening. Our Father in heaven, I just pray that you'll bless this work, Lord, bless the church, bless this vision that he has, Lord, and let us see lives of kids in the foster care changed, so they may become followers of you and just see their lives transformed in a mighty way. In that precious name of Jesus. Amen.